Hey everyone, James here. Today going to be talking some more about some Italian genre films. As a lot of people that have been following the channel closely probably know, I've been talking a lot about poliziotteschi, but today I'm going to bounce over to the other big genre that I like to talk about on the YouTube channel, and that is gialli, so giallos. And this is sort of I'm basically doing the same thing I did for poliziotteschi for gialli. I'm going to be talking about the 12 essential gialli. So why make this list? Well, for me at least, lists were really, really important when I was first getting into these genres, having like a list of films to get into, not just one or two, but a bunch of them. And for me at least, I wanted to make a list that kind of encompasses kind of the big variety and not just kind of the repeats, not just all Golden Age gialli, not just like necessarily gialli from all over the place, but kind of shows a lot of the different directions that gialli went, shows the genre and the trend. So this is not 12 best with no caveats or my 12 favorites or anything like that. This is kind of the 12 that I think if I was trying to show someone what the genre is and I wanted to give them a crash course on it, these are the 12 films that I would probably recommend to them. I think they sum up a lot of what the genre is for most people. I use, I think, a little bit of a broader term for gialli. For me at least, it doesn't always mean black glove killer. My understanding of it is closer to the Italian definition as well. Trey Holworth in his books on gialli talks a bit about that too. Anyways, I don't find the discussion of semantics of what is gialli and what's not particularly interesting, but wanted to mention that there. So within this list, of course, we're definitely going to get into the big directors. Another thing that's worth noting is I was looking through this list, and other than one very notable exception, there are Blu-rays for a lot of these films. And I think that really, really benefits the genre for a lot of obvious reasons. But maybe perhaps more so than something like poliziotteschi, just the fact that a lot of these films are very, very visually beautiful. And we look at probably kind of the two main kind of godfathers of the gialli, people like Mario Bava and Dario Argento. These guys were visual directors, and I think if we were to list their strengths, that would be their visuals, their blocking, and their ways to dynamically stage murders and things like that are absolutely essential to their appeal. They're not necessarily known as great narrative filmmakers like someone like Damiano Damiani is for the Italian crime film. So that's worth noting too, because I think the restorations and things like that. And so there are a lot of giallis that are even much less well known than most of the films that I'm going to talk about today that have had Blu-rays. I mean, in fact, it's becoming quite hard to find giallis that have not had Blu-ray releases, which is amazing. Vinegar Syndrome has released a couple box sets of Forgotten Gialli. Anyways, I don't want to go too far into that, but it's great that people can see these in really, really high quality. For me, at least, gialli is also a genre with a fairly high floor. If you have like great soundtrack and great location, I'm probably going to like the film. Even something that, in my opinion, is, fairly middling as far as gialli goes, I can still find to be pretty enjoyable, something like Eyeball from Umberto Lenza. Anyways, let's get into the 12 different films now. Okay, so going to be going chronologically, sort of like the poliziotteschi list. First up, we have The Girl Who Knew Too Much from 1963, the early 60s. And this one, coming in from the title, it really helps to bridge the gap from Hitchcock to gialli. It's filmed in black and white, so in many ways a very, very atypical giallo. It's also a good film. It has good use of staging and locations, things that we would definitely know Mario Bava for. It's certainly not his most influential giallo, but it's often credited as being the first, and I think it's quite a good film. And I think you can sort of see the foundation being set there, which really kind of sets the stage for his next film that came after that, Blood and Black Lace, which is, in my opinion, top 3, top 4 essential gialli pick. This one is where you take a lot of the kind of the foundation that was being set in Girl Who Knew Too Much, and then you apply this incredible color palette and incredible blocking, and everything just pops. It's really, really a wonderful film. In my opinion, it's kind of the first gialli masterpiece, and it's very, very easy to see the appeal of a film like this. And for me at least, Mario Bava, who directed both of these films, is not necessarily a great narrative filmmaker, but understanding kind of what the film is and where it comes from, I was able to appreciate this film more and more on repeated viewing. So for me at least, I actually very much look forward to watching this film again. In fact, I'm probably due for another watch. and I find it to be very, very rewatchable just because the colors and everything is just so beautifully staged, and the filmmaking is just A+. For me, at least, this is probably my favorite Mario Bava film. Just a really, really wonderful film. If you are familiar with Gialli, you probably don't need me to shout out those two, but nonetheless, I wanted to mention them there. Next up, I have one that is probably, on the lower end of my own ranking of these personal 12, and if I were to do 12 Gialli, my favorites, no caveats, this would definitely not make the list, but I wanted to represent this period between Blood and Black Lace and Bird with the Crystal Plumage, a period, Blood and Black Lace not necessarily a big hit, so there weren't a ton of films that were trying to imitate the same sort of formula and style that Mario Bava had created there. So as a result, there's a little bit of a vacuum, and so these films a lot of them are more domesticated dramas. They're sort of domesticated thrillers in a way. There's not as many body counts as you would have later, post-Bird. And you have influences from things like Le Diabolique. You have a lot of these Carol Baker, Umberto Lenzi collaborations. In my opinion, my favorite from this period is Libido, but So Sweet, So Perverse, I think, better encompasses it. I think Libido is more like an interesting, low-budget spin-off. But this one kind of takes that jet-set lifestyle. This focuses more on kind of the wealthy and the upper class, but it's a Le Diabolique spin-off. Jean-Louis Trintignant, sorry for butchering the name. So good cast, some nice twists there. I think it's a very solid film. I personally wouldn't put this at the very top, but I think it's definitely worth checking out. And if more of that domesticated drama appeals to you, then I think films within this era are well worth checking out too. And they at least represent something a little bit different than the formula that would become repeated and repeated and repeated over again. Next up, we have one of the most significant Gialli, Bird with the Crystal Plumage. This is Dario Argento's initial debut film. It kicked off the Animal trilogy and really takes what Bava did and expands it. Argento is very fortunate in the sense that he had his daddy, a big Italian producer at the time, helping him out, and so he's able to pull in big guns like Vittorio Storaro for the cinematography and not Mary Bava, Ennio Morricone for the score. So he's already working with world-class craftsmen from the get-go, and he really refocuses the genre, brings it back to more of this urban setting and things like that. And I think it's a very good film. It would be a very, very influential film, very, very often imitated down to the name, which is a very kind of long name, and we'd have progressively crazier and crazier names that would happen there. So Bird with the Crystal Plumage, very good film, for me at least. I like Blood and Black Lace a little bit more, but it's definitely well worth checking out, and I think if I were to name perhaps one Gialli to start off with, this one might be the one. It's just a very good film and has a lot of stuff going for it, and you could sort of see why this would take off. Next up, I wanted to do a Sergio Martino film. So I have, he did a lot of really, really good Golden Age Gialli. So I picked here A Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward. Easily could have been the case of Scorpion's Tail, Vice of the Locked Room, and Only I Have the Key, or All the Colors of the Dark. And what's interesting about this film, this is the first Gialli he did, is it's a bit like Diabolique crossed with Bird with the Crystal Plumage. And if you were to look at what the writer said, it almost feels like the Bird plotline was shoehorned in. And it sounds like, maybe that doesn't sound super focused or super great, but it actually works really, really well. And I think this film kind of shows you the Sergio Martino team, who was his brother, Luciano Martino, who produced a lot of this film, Edwidge Fenech, who is one of the beautiful actresses associated with Gialli, who is in this film, George Hilton, who is in a lot of these films too, and Ernesto Gastaldi, who I think is one of the better writers in the genre. And for me at least, these films are very, very fun. I don't know that they're B movies for sure, but I think they're some of the better films that were created here, and I really like them, and I find them very, very rewatchable. And Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward is personally one that I prefer just by a little bit over those other ones. The other ones could very well be named by other people too. Okay, so next up I won't have Who Saw Her Die by Aldo Lato, who also did The Short Night of Glass Dolls. And this is kind of like the Gialli tinged Don't Look Now. And this is just a really rock solid and golden age Gialli. When we're talking about golden age Giallis, we're usually referring to films from 1970 to 1975. That really is associated with the boom of gialli. A lot of these films started to be made after Bird with the Crystal Plumage was out in 1970. And I think specifically 1970 to 1973 represents a huge amount of the gialli created there. And I didn't want to over-represent gialli all over the place. There's a lot of weird old ones that we can include, things like Stage Fright, Murder Rock, films which I quite like in a lot of ways, but I think you can really overlook a lot of the gialli that are being made at the time, which are really, really nice. So this one, sort of like Don't Look Now, is set in Venice, has some great locations, has some great music, and has just a lot of the genre characteristics that really, really, really like and enjoy the gialli fans, that is. Okay, next up, I have the first film by Lucio Fulci, who I think is one of the sort of seminal gialli craftsmen. Psychic is probably my favorite of his, but I don't mention that here. I think this one's a golden age gialli, but it's something different. And Lucio Fulci was always zagging a little bit when compared to Argento. Not that he's not really talented visual craftsman or anything like that, just that he's interested in slightly different things. This one focuses more on social issues. It's also notably rural. It's not as much of a sleaze fest as you might associate Lucio Fulci with, especially if you're just familiar with kind of his late 70s, early 80s work in horror and whatnot. Nonetheless, I think this is definitely one of his best films and one of his most effective films. It has a unusually restrained Tomas Milian, if you've seen a lot of its Poliziotteschi. It's got Barbara Boucher, and just kind of a great cast all around. It's not the most uplifting gialli, but it has a incredible ending, including a great dummy death that no one is going to forget. So a really, really good film, and I think my favorite of kind of the earlier Fulci gialli that he... Okay, so next up I have Torso. Torso is another film made by Sergio Martino. So you're like, oh, okay, probably more of the same. But for me at least, I had already seen the other gialli that Sergio Martino had made before this, and Torso really, really caught me off guard. It's fairly different. Sort of like Bay of Blood, which was made by Mara Bava around the same time, which I did not pick for this list. This can exist as sort of a proto-slasher. In some ways, it simplifies characters and plots, and it kind of distills it to its essential and milks the crap out of it for a lot of suspense. There's some very, very clever writing with the key here. And I think this is just a really, really good film if you are a sucker like me for kind of that Hitchcockian suspense and things like that going on. So this is absolutely one of my personal favorites. I know people differ on where they rank this one, but I think it really does stand out as being a little bit different from the other Sergio Martino films that he was creating a year or two later. I think this one came out in 1973, so still sort of in the middle of that golden age. But the gialli, a lot of gialli had been made by the time 1973 rolled around, as opposed to 1970. Okay, next up I have perhaps the first exclamation point in the gialli genre, the film that really caps off the golden age, and I think it's one of the masterpieces of the genre, Deep Red. And for me at least, this was my initial hook into the genre. It's just so amped up, it's so mean, it's so rich, the use of music is extraordinary. And you can see the ambition and things like that, and it really is kind of like a bridge from the earlier Animal trilogy, which I think is aims a little lower and is a little more humble in its origins to kind of the grandness and of Suspiria, and it's really kind of the giallo version of that. So really great goblin score, things like that going on, incredible visuals of the film, really just deep hues and things like that. Love it. One of my absolute favorites. So Deep Red. Next up, I have another film released right around the same time, and one of those films that does not have a Blu-ray, and it's another one set in rural, and it has just a lot of creepiness and atmosphere, and that is Pupi Avati's House with the Laughing Windows. And this is a little bit of a different take. It leans a little bit more into kind of what we would think of horror tropes and things like that. We have like some great uses of locations, some great rural setting, and it's different than the Argento films or the other films being created at the time. And I think it's definitely one of the better ones. It's slowly become kind of a personal favorite of mine. It's a little bit more of a slow burn than the other ones, but I would still highly recommend this film. Okay, next up we are jumping forward for our last two films. You could easily end the list right here, but we're going to 1982 because the giallo genre would continue, and there are definitely some really interesting later gialli that would be created, so you could call these late cycle if you like. First up, we have Lucio Fulci in New York Ripper. This one is set in New York. Some people might not even call this a giallo. Personally, I think it's a giallo. There are times when this goes completely into kind of Argento world in terms of crazy, impressionistic lighting and things like that. I love the way it looks. It captures that sleazy late 70s, early 80s New York vibe to it. And it is just a nasty film, and it really, really lingers. I think for me, at least, one important thing about my favorites of the genre, too, is like, do you remember the film? Do you, are there parts of it that linger? Sometimes films are very, very disposable. Even if you quite enjoyed it at the time, you may not remember it. New York Ripper is one that is going to linger and stay with you. I don't think it's a perfect film by any means, but I think it's really, really good. And I think really, really underrated. And for me, at least, it's probably one of the most rewatchable gialli. I don't know what that says about me, personally, but I really, really like this film. I think it's still Fulci at its peak. A little bit of a controversial one for Fulci heads, but I like it just as much as the Gates of Hell trilogy that he was creating right around the same time. Okay, last up, I have Tenebrae. Easily could have named Opera here too, but I think that kind of, I would rather fit another Golden Age gialli in than Opera, even though I love Opera a lot too. So Tenebrae is like the second and the third exclamation mark that Argento makes on the genre. It's kind of the meta text of it. We have an author from New York who's coming to Italy to market his books, which are kind of like these murder mysteries. So already it's sort of Argento riffing on himself as sort of like this creative entertainer. And it's just a really, really terrific film. It has a very, very different look than all of the other gialli that came before it. The only one that would kind of riff on it was Midnight Ripper, which came later by Lamberto Bava, the son of Mario. And it has this kind of very postmodern, very white, futuristic look to it that looks totally different from something like Deep Red, which has a much darker look to it. So, love Tenebrae too. It's just a great story. For me, at least, I always go back and forth between Deep Red and Tenebrae, like a lot of gialli fans, on what is personally my favorite. Some just great performances. You have another great Goblin score. That's very different from Deep Red and Suspiria, by the way. And it's just very, very cleverly written. For me, at least, this might be Argento's sort of magnum opus as a writer. I think he would continue to do some good visual work, specifically on opera, but I think this is one of his films that stands out as being very, very cleverly written as well. Which is interesting because he really is stronger as a visual artist than a writer, even though he kind of had his start as sort of a critic and a writer on films like Once Upon a Time in the West. Anyways, I'm rambling a little bit. So that wraps up the 12 gialli. I'm going to list them from the top here. Girl Who Knew Too Much, Blood and Black Lace, So Sweet, So Perverse, Bird with the Crystal Plumage, Strange Vice of Mrs. Ward, Who Saw Her Die, Don't Torture a Duckling, Torso, Deep Red, House with the Laughing Windows, New York River, and Tenebrae. I think those are 12 really, really great gialli for people to enjoy. So hopefully people got something out of this episode. If you've seen the films already, let me know what your list would be. Let me know how it differs. And I will see you all next time.